A very warm welcome all to Act Committed Together, a roadmap to achieve ICPD. I am Pooja, a She Decides 25 young leader and youth worker with Prava. I have the pleasure to be the moderator of this youth-led event to celebrate World Population Day. In November 2019, delegates and changemakers from across the world gathered in Kenya to re-energize and recommit to the efforts for universal bodily autonomy, marking the 25th anniversary of the landmark International Conference on Population and Development. Governments of 137 countries made commitments, and as per the UNFPA estimates, over $1 billion were committed to support SRHR and gender equality programs. I was there with my She Decides young leaders, and it was truly electrifying to witness all that firsthand. On my way back, I kept thinking about accountability. Today, IPPF is launching the report that aims to provide a tool for accountability for civil societies at the national level to ensure that the promises of ICPD agenda become a reality for all. The report is available in multiple languages on the website. IPPF is also launching a database where everyone in the world can easily check what their governments have promised to advance ICPD agendas. Now, I invite you to watch a video with us. Now, more than ever, when the pandemic threatens to roll back the major progresses made in the feminist movement over the past decades, it is important that we join hands and continue to fight for the basic human rights and dignity for all, to ensure that her right to decide is protected and upheld. Before we proceed, I would like to share that we have Fuselight here with us today, who will be graphically recording the entire event and will be presenting it in a visual summary at the end of the event. Thank you, Fuselight, for supporting us. I now have the pleasure to introduce you to Estelle. Estelle is the International Advocacy Officer at IPPF, Geneva Liaison Office and US Liaison Office, where she develops and implements advocacy strategies to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights. She has extensive experience in human rights, coordinating civil society at the international and regional levels, and advising on advocacy strategy to advance human rights at the national level through UN engagement. She has very kindly accepted to fill in for Kobe Smith, our young leader from Guyana, who couldn't join due to bad weather impacting the connectivity. Welcome, Estelle.
Thank you very much, Pooja. And apologies, everyone, that you'll be hearing from me instead of Kobe. But I'll do my best to introduce this report, which we have worked on for a long time. A lot of people have contributed to it, and we're really delighted to be able to present it to you today. As you know, government, civil society, academia, the private sector, faith-based organizations, international financial institutions, grassroots organizations, and other partners came together for the 2019 Nairobi Summit that celebrated ICPD+25 in the pursuit of sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, and to make voluntary commitments. We would very much like to thank Aymar Sparks, who's written this report, and the IPPF Advocacy Advisory Group, who contributed to it, and UNFPA for their continuous partnership on this project. You can go to the next slide. So this report and the database are dedicated to all of the advocates who want to make the world better in favor of sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender equality for all people so they can fully enjoy their human rights. Our analysis aims to provide strategic information to civil society organizations that work at the national level to hold governments accountable for the commitments that they've made at the Nairobi Summit. This is all in order to achieve changes at the national level through policies, budgets, structures, and practices that protect, promote, respect, protect, fulfill, and guarantee sexual and reproductive health and rights. And ultimately to achieve the ICPD program of action to benefit women and girls everywhere. We hope that you use the database and the report. I have put them in the chat so you can take a look while we're talking. It's not actually one report. We have a battery of publications. So the main report is available in English, and that is a very comprehensive and detailed analysis of the commitments. And then we have briefings available in each language that's for the regions, so relevant languages for each region. In the Americas, the regional report will be in Spanish and English. In Europe and Central Asia, it will be in Russian and English. In the Arab world, it's in Arabic and English. In Africa, it will be French, Portuguese, and English. And in Asia and the Pacific, the regional report is in English. And these are available on the link that is in the chat. You will also be able to see the database, which contains all of the commitments. So just a couple notes on the differences between the report and the database. The report was based on all of the commitments that were submitted by countries by the deadline of December 10th, 2019, at the time of the Nairobi Summit. And so that's what's been analyzed in the report. However, the UNFPA website has been open for additional contributions and finalizations of those commitments. And so it is these most up-to-date commitments that you will find in the database in order to facilitate transparency and accountability work at the national level. So Isabel is showing you here what the database looks like. The link is in the chat. You can explore it. You can search by country, by region, or by theme. And the themes are the IPPF Advocacy Common Agenda themes of gender equality, sexual and gender-based violence, universal health coverage, and abortion. And then there are other ones which are relevant to SRHR, and those are, but don't necessarily fall into one of those categories, and those are classified as other. So you can take a look at what your country has committed to, and if you're interested, link back to the official commitment on the UNFPA website. So the scope of the analysis identifies emerging issues and gaps. And as I said, it only includes commitments made by the 137 national governments that were attending Nairobi and that are published in the UNFPA database. So it excludes the private sector commitment, NGO commitments, and other stakeholder commitments, which you can find on the UNFPA Nairobi site. The analysis includes 3 areas. It cross-references commitments with thematic priorities of the IPPF Common Agenda. So as I said before, I'll go a little bit more into detail here. Universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that includes access to modern contraception and universal health coverage, safe abortion, comprehensive sexuality education, sexual and gender-based violence, and SRHR and gender equality in the political architecture at global, national, and regional levels. Those are the ACA Advocacy Common Agenda priorities. The report analyzes, in addition to the themes, how these commitments are formulated. So the quality level, aiming for commitments that are SMART, as advised by UNFPA in the lead up to Nairobi. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So how SMART the different commitments is also analyzed. And then the relationship with ICPD regional frameworks like Montevideo Consensus and the Maputo Plan of Action. The report looks at commitment trends. It looks at The governments have made commitments across a number of areas, which is really good news. There's a broad variety of commitments. The main trends for which we've seen in the report are investing in young people's sexual and reproductive health, the importance of improving data collection, tackling and eliminating gender-based violence, gender equality, and specifically the integration of gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights into national political structures, and ensuring access to contraception, including for young people. The report also looks at some thematic gaps and disparities in commitments, including abortion. Abortion is the theme that has the least number of commitments and remains an ideological touchstone with some clearly demarcated geographical lines. There is also a gap in terms of underserved populations, as there's not as much emphasis on reaching underserved populations as there are in regional ICPD agreements, and of course the Agenda 2030, where the tagline is leaving no one behind. Additionally, the report breaks down information and commitments related to financing. So the highest number of domestic financial commitments you'll see coming out of the South Asia region, that's 25%, and the lowest you see coming out of the Americas, only 5%. The highest development financing commitments come from Europe and Central Asia, also 5%. So one of the main conclusions of the report is that we need to act. There is political will from some governments on SRHR and gender equality, but we have a key moment in time right now where we have the review of the 2030 Agenda that we've hit 5 years on now, 25 years of ICPD, 25 years of Beijing, and we are at a moment in time where there is a lot of opportunities for us to build back better. So we encourage you to use this report to galvanize political will, form coalitions, work together, and do this work in the urgent way that it needs to be done. So let's not forget to link this work to the Sustainable Development Goals, to FP 2020, to Beijing, and to, of course, ICPD, as we work together at the national level to ensure that sexual and reproductive health and rights become a reality for women and girls around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Estelle, for that brilliant introduction to the report. We invite you all to check it out and explore how it can be useful to your unique contexts. Now we have Anna Faz with us. She's an amazing spoken word artist from Southeast London who speaks truth through her words and places realities in a manner that has power to move us all. Let us hear her out.
What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a cook because I would take pride in what my mother would do. To feed all of us belly full with hardly any food, I would never take that skill for granted, but at the time, okay, I didn't think it was cool. Because when I was growing up, I wanted to be a footballer. Yes, because when I first came to this country, the language I couldn't speak, but I created my own with the ball and my feet, eventually exceeding what was expected of me. Some of the boys tried, and I emphasize tried, to pick on me. Don't you know you're just a girl? Why don't you play with your hair, play with that flower, play with that kitchen set? As a young girl, I couldn't comprehend that you were trying to belittle me and push me down instead. But being stubborn is one of my best traits. So yes, I did learn this lesson a few times again. Like when I told you I wanted to be the head of a company one day and you laughed at me. Or when I told you I wanted to aspire to play roles where I could show I had brains, where I could be the superhero, not constantly subjected to the male gaze. You said that won't sell today. Then I started falling victim to social constraints, questioning my worth and even my reasons. Can you stay on the phone because it's late and dark and I'm questioning which way to go home? And then I questioned my appearance. Was it too revealing? I didn't realize that my clothes, even if it was covering up every single part of my body, could seem provocative, and I was giving out an image that I wanted it. See, I had to learn to be wiser, forced to think twice, and apparently not bring it upon myself. I had to learn when it was Black Friday, my body could be an item on the shelf. It seems, as young girls, you're taught indirectly not to question society, but to question yourself. And now I realize that there is no difference between my experience or your experience or my mother always having to be in the kitchen. But like I said, being stubborn is one of my best traits. So yes, of course, I would observe and listen, my mother telling me how to season. But when a man told me that's where you should be, I never listened, because I now know there are many ways to be imprisoned, and I never knew that messages could be hidden. Because I wasn't just cooking. I was learning resilience, like waxing on and waxing off. Really, you were teaching me to wake up when enough is enough. Mum would say, Anna, in life there is no luck. So what do you want to be when you grow up? I realize now that I just wanted permission to dream, to be allowed to ask questions, to roam the streets without pressure, to learn the right lessons, to be motivated to succeed no matter what that success looked like. I wanted to excel. And I wanted my success to be as much yours as it is mine as well. I wasn't trying to compete. But if I have to, I will win. And it's not because I want to, it's because I have to. It seems to be the only way that you will see my value. I am not just a girl. I am rooted and grounded like a tree, growing where the light may be, able to give life beyond me, as beautiful and rare as a pearl, and as relentless and tough as my curls. I am not just a girl. I am a woman now. And whether it's nature, nurture, or both, I choose to adapt, but to never mold, not even in a man's world. Thank you.
Well, that was powerful. I absolutely loved it, and I hope you all did too. I do get goosebumps every time I listen to Anna. She's just brilliant. And it reminds us of the challenges that women and girls still face regarding their aspirations and why we need to keep working on the ICPD promises. You can access Anna's work on her website that you can see in the chat box now. For the next part of the event, which is also the most exciting, we have 5 brilliant youth leaders from Sierra Leone, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal, the Philippines, and Yemen with us, who will be asking one critical question each to discuss how to act committed together to advance ICPD. Before introducing you to the panel, I would like to give a warm welcome to Natalia Khanum, UNFPA Executive Director, who will honor us with some closing remarks at the end of the dialogue. Many thanks, Dr. Khanum. I now have the pleasure to introduce you to our distinguished panel. Dr. Carla Berdyshevsky, Director, National Center for Gender Equality and Reproductive Health, Government of Mexico. Carla currently leads the National Center for Gender Equity and Reproductive Health at the Mexico Federal Ministry of Health. Carla trained as a medical doctor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and holds a Master of Public Health in Developing Countries from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Carla. Next, we have Denmark Ambassador to the UN, Martin Ville Hermann, Government of Denmark. Martin has been the ambassador and permanent representative of Denmark to the United Nations since January 2019. Before taking up his position, Ambassador Hermann served as State Secretary for Development Policy in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, prior to which he served as ambassador to Indonesia. Welcome, Ambassador. Ms. Vanita Mukherjee from Development Alternatives for Women for New Era. Vanita is Dawn's executive committee member, working on issue of gender and reproductive justice. In the run-up to ICPD, Vanita was engaged with the feminist movement at the national, regional, and global levels for reproductive rights and justice. Vanita started out as an activist in 1982 and has worked in several feminist groups, organizations, and networks in various capacities, contributing to advocacy, capacity building, and action research. Welcome, Vanita ji. We also have Nadu Adiko from Youth Action Movement Accra, Ghana. Nadu Adiko is a young sexual and reproductive health advocate. She currently works with Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana as a field assistant. She's been training on mentoring, adolescent sexual and reproductive health issue, particularly family planning, STIs, HIV/AIDS, and adolescent reproductive health and rights. Welcome, Adiko. And we also have with us Dr. Alvaro Bermejo, IPPF Director General. Dr. Bermejo has more than 20 years of experience as a senior executive in global federations, working across HIV and AIDS, humanitarian issues, and health policy. Dr. Bermejo is a medical doctor and holds an MA in public health from the University of Leeds. Welcome, Dr. Bermejo. And for the actual dialogue part now, I hand over to our young leader, Laurie from the Philippines. Over to you, Laurie.
Thank you so much, Pooja. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Once again, I am Laura Joy Paragon, Youth Representative of Family Planning Organization of the Philippines and Youth Member of IPPF Asia. The report shows that many commitments were made on the empowerment of youth in many areas. Government willingness to invest in youth is very positive trait. Now, how those commitments happen? Nadu, as you are a youth advocate and youth activist in the national level, I would like to ask you this question. What are the practical steps we, as young people, can take to demand for improved adolescent and youth-friendly health facilities and ensure that sexual reproductive health and rights needs of our fellow young person are covered as part of the universal health care package? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurie. So I want to start by saying that when we say universal access to health education, is making sure that reproductive health services is accessible to the poorest and most marginalized adolescent and young people, and that if they have access to it, it will help them have control and choice over their reproductive life to pursue their education and be informed. And taking from what she said, indeed, the report shows that there's a positive trend that the government willingness to invest in the youth. So I'm going to proceed to understand what practical steps young people can take to ensure that adolescent health facilities are made for and their services and needs are included in the universal health package. We want to first of all understand what is the practical reasons or what even hinders young people in the first place to access these facilities. And on the individual level, with the youth more go with peer validation, like they want to, I will take my friend's word for it than what is right. And also because there's not much adequate information reaching them and they appreciating the importance of SRA child services and information, it becomes a hindrance for them to even pursue or go to the facilities in the first place. And so low socioeconomic status, where young people are not equipped financially and would prefer free services instead of going to the facility to get the service themselves. Now, in regards to the community level, most thing that will hinder young people is the myth and misconceptions, which is a problem, and the negative influence from significant persons in their life. And I'm taking it from Ghana here. In-laws and parents, and I'm sure across the world, have much influence. If your mom or dad tells you that no, family planning is not good, or I'd rather treat you at home instead of going to the hospital, they take their word more. And also some influence of religion. Some people abide by the religion and that region frowns upon they going for these services. And the third bit of the issue hindering others on the community level is social cultural practices. In Ghana, mostly among the marginalized young people, it is assumed or they attach a sense of belongings to fertility. So irrespective of the age, if you're able to, the number of children you're able to have gives you some form of belonging or prestige. And with regards to the health systems and the institution level, because there's non-availability or inconsistency in reproductive health information and promotion, it doesn't foster that awareness or the need for young people to even access these services in the facilities. And also because of perceived and real hostile attitude of some health providers, it also serves as a hindrance. And even one of the key measures, there's not even the existence of the infrastructure talking about the adolescent youth friendly services in their communities. Even if there is, the distance to get to becomes sort of a hindrance. So in now understanding these problems, what practical steps young people can do, and again I'm going to go with the individual, community and health systems level. So on the individual level, what young people can do is that young people who have gone for the service or have been there, so in this regard, satisfied young people can assure each other or assure their friends of provider friendliness, thereby improving their health seeking behavior. So if for instance as a young person I went for a counseling session and it did me good, I'm supposed to spread the word or encourage my peers to also know, don't sit at home, don't visit a quack doctor or something, go to the health facility and get your service done. With that, when we improve our health seeking, but there will be enough data to be collected by the people in panel. No, the young people are patronizing it, so there's a need for us to put these structures in place to help them. And also we can create awareness through our social media platform. Most young people have social media handles on Twitter, Instagram, and whatnot. So when we create that trend or open letters and petitions targeted at the institutions responsible, as they see that young people are now being vocal and talking about it, it will ensure that our needs are heard and are factored in the reproductive health package. And on the community level, we can form alliance and peer groups to discuss and debunk the issue and address issues of misconceptions and myths, and also empower and educate our significant persons to appreciate the importance of SRHR information and services. So if their parent groups that can be met, or PTAs to be admonished that no, this is the need on the ground, and there's a need for you to support us so that our young people don't fall victim, but get the comprehensive services they need. And also we as young people, we can also be vocal and advocate against negative social cultural practices that undermine the progress of or the momentum or the role of young people for going for these facilities, a service from these facilities, sorry. And my last section will be on the health systems and institutional level. We have to, as young people, engage our leaders to subsidize and make it SRHR free and accessible. When I say engage, you should be empowered to take leadership roles. So when we are in position or when we occupy a relevant position, we're able to speak for the youth and advocate that this is what we know. Most people you cannot afford it. So if a subsidy can be done, or if they can make the services free to ensure more patronage. And the last but not the least, we as young people, practical steps we can include as well is to report all forms of judgmental and hostile attitude meted against us. So we have to speak up. If you witness something and it's not right, it shouldn't deter you from going for the service. But if you speak up to appropriate authorities, it will help what they need to know that no, this thing going on is affecting the youth and the youth. So we have to do something about it. And my last point is that there should be youth representation on clinic management team. So to the health provider or the health systems, when they form their committee to address the needs of young people, there should be youth presentation, and they would advocate for the provision of the a adolescent youth friendly service or unit in their clinic. Because again, taking a cue from Ghana, there's limited number of adolescent youth friendly
Sorry.
services. Why?
Hello.
Because
Sorry, Nadu. Sorry to
hello.
interrupt you. And brilliant points. Thank you for making such brilliant points. Could you please try to summarize it in 30 seconds?
Yeah,
Sorry
so
about that.
I'm in. Yeah, I'm actually on the last point. I've ended here. So I want to say that the future look promising for the youth, and it's ours to take it. And also to just conclude that irrespective of the youth making effort for things to be done for us, doesn't mean that, or it's not an excuse for the people in position not to create these structures for us. Thank you.
That was amazing, very amazing. So, identifying hindrances, addressing issues, empower and assure our fellow young people that it's okay to seek help, especially it's about sexual reproductive health and rights. Yeah, making sure that SRH services are visible, accessible, and available. Thank you so much for that, Nadu. And now it's time for me to hand over the floor to Sukrasha Gire, youth leader of Nepal, to ask her question about safe abortion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauria. Hi, I'm Suraksha Giri, all the way from a beautiful home country, Nepal, and I am a youth member and a youth volunteer in Family Planning Associations of Nepal, the member association of IPPF, and the branch executive board member in Palpa district. Currently, I'm also the member of board of trustee in IPPF. So my question would be to Vanita Mukherjee ma'am on the theme safe abortion. So, being an advocate in the feminist movement, you know how bad news it is that safe abortion has the lowest commitments. And Arab world and Asian Pacific has no commitments at all, and many of the Asians and South Asian countries have not legalized safe abortion yet. I know you were in the Cairo ICPD conference back in 1994, and abortion was an issue back then. So my question to you is, can you tell us how did you deal with the oppositions in 1994? And would you please recommend us the effective advocacy and political strategy to advance the access to legal and safe abortion and reduce the stigma? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suraksha. And good evening to everyone, and my hearty congratulations to IPPF for your act. It's my pleasure to represent Dawn here, a global feminist network that played a critical role at the UN conferences in the 1990s, including in the ICPD Cairo 1994, and even at the recent Nairobi Summit. I'm privileged to be sharing our advocacy and political strategies with all of you, the youth advocates here. When we look back at ICPD Cairo, it was like one of my Dawn colleagues said, moving in the eye of the storm. There were many, many challenges to surmount. For just an example, there were 179 countries in Cairo. There was 113 pages of a draft program of actions for negotiation, and the main opposition, especially to abortion, was the Vatican, the Holy See that has an observer status in the UN, and it held the conference to hostage for 2 days on this particular issue of safe abortion. I think by now it's become the most famous para 8.25 of the program of actions. So the negotiation on abortions were highly protracted. But in the end, I think history was created because the deadlock on including safe abortion was finally accepted with a carefully crafted paragraph that's an epitome of diplomatic wordsmithing. How did this happen? What was the women's movement or the feminist movement role in this? For them, it did not happen over those 2 days when the conference was held hostage. It happened over 2 years with key political strategies and savvy leadership by the movement. The buildup of Cairo actually began in 1992, and that's how long it takes. At the Rio UNCED conference, okay, the environment conference, and later also at the Vienna conference in 1993. Now, the Rio Unsaid was a breakthrough for the feminist movement because for the first time, they sat face to face with the northern feminists, the women coming from the north, who had a different agenda from us, and for thrashing out the very controversial issue on the issue of environment and population. Now, next we moved to Vienna, which was the Human Rights Conference, and that was another iconic conference because that is where women's rights was declared as human rights. And therefore, it allowed a very good conceptual space for feminists to position reproductive rights as human rights in the Cairo conference. So several international, regional, national feminist groups were involved on the road to Cairo, and over this 2 to 1.5 years, and notable among them I would need to mention is the International Women's Health Coalition, the Dawn, We Do, the IRAG, the Girl Power, the Women Living Under Muslim Laws, the Catholics for Free Choice, and many, many others who were there. So the process and the stakeholders involved for ICPD made the learning curve very, very steep for feminists. Remember, this was a time when there was no internet, and even phone calls were a challenge for us. And yet, we managed to mobilize women from all over the world. In terms of our political strategy, I would like to list out a few. First, we mobilized a global feminist platform for ICPD with an organization committee. Now, the foundation for bridging the North and South divide was laid at the Rio conference. In Cairo, we further diversified our base for representation from within the South based on geography, representation of disadvantaged groups, and by affiliation like social movements, NGOs, research organizations, and so on. Now, for such a motley diverse group coming together, it was very important to clarify our political positions, our principles, our ethical issues, what were our bottom lines, most important, what were our non-negotiables. And I think what was also important to emphasize that we had to have mutual respect for one another, and we had to listen to various points of view. It was clear to everyone coming together for Cairo and to the feminist movement that we had to leave our egos and our logos behind. The second one was we created and disseminated a new discourse. Yeah?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, Ms. Anita. We actually love what you're saying right now, and we hear you, just requesting you to, if possible, wrap it up in 30 seconds. That would really be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So actually, we created a new discourse. We had this Women's Declaration for ICPD, in which 79 countries were represented. We mapped actors and institutions. I think one of the most important thing was we were present at every stage of the negotiation at the PrepComs as well. We also built a refined inside-outside strategy where, we had people who were our allies who secured positions on the national delegations, and there were others from outside who were key for advocacy. And the last point I want to make is that we anticipated challenges ahead and gained access to key actors. And we created a network of strategic relationships. We had relationship with the chairpersons of the PrepComs at ICPD Cairo, and this is very important, with delegates who were chair to the working groups, especially those who were tasked to resolve the language disputes and contentious issues as abortion, human rights, SRHR, and adolescents and young people. I think we sought support from the UNFPA right from the beginning, but as it turned out, it was a challenge because in 1993 and 94, feminists were viewed as adversaries and not allies. So it took a while till we got a formal support from UNFPA quite late in the process in face of the mounting opposition to the ICPD agenda by the religious and conservative forces, when finally seeing the fierce opposition to the conference, Nafis Sadiq finally recognized us as allies. So in the PrepComs, we had Women's Caucus breakfast meeting. Also, there was an awareness that delegates who come to this conference are a mix. They're mostly career diplomats, they're generalists, and you really need to educate them. and they're not experts on health, gender, and rights. So therefore, you need to avoid jargon for advocacy. So I think all these political strategies paid off very well, and the women's demands actually were accommodated in 2 chapters of the program of our action, POA, which is gender equality and the empowerment of women, and reproductive rights, reproductive health, and family planning. And I think this movement managed to change the whole discourse and the paradigm shift from demography to women's rights and empowerment. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Hi, thank you so much, Vanita ma'am. You have mentioned despite being there was no internet, no phone calls, but then you were there as a feminist, and you are here now, and then you made it, and you fought for our women, and women rights were declared as a human right. So that was an excellent thing that we heard today. So thank you so much once again. I would like to hand over from here to Taha from Yemen, who's going to question about comprehensive sexuality education to Dr. Alvaro. Now I would like to hand over to Taha. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Kyrgyzstan. My name is Ulubatır Galiyev, not Taha. I am from Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia country. I am a chair of the National Youth Committee of Reproductive Health Alliance of Kyrgyzstan, IPPF trustee, Youth Focal Point at Family Planning 2020, and member of steering committee of YSAFE. My question will go to Mr. Martin Billy Herman on the SRHR and gender equality in political architecture. So let me take this chance to say thanks for all Denmark citizens and government who supported the Nairobi Summit. We know that commitment without money behind can be empty words. Before asking my question, I just want to note that report shows that 25% of the commitment in South Asia were dedicated to domestic funding, followed by Africa with 13%. Most domestic funding commitments were focused on sexual and gender-based violence and gender equality. Concerning official developmental assistance commitments, Europe and Central Asia lead with about 5% of commitment dedicated to this area. So my question is, using Denmark as a background, what do you think other governments would get from investing domestic funding in SRHR and empowering women, especially in politics? How can we convince government invest more and measure success on gender equality? And do you have lessons learned from this? And could you please share with us?
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
No, thank you, Ulukbek, and thanks to IPPF for having me and for organizing this, and to Anna, if she's still online, thank you for that poetry, powerful, potent, and very precise. Let me start by saying that Denmark is, of course, very proud to have partnered with UNFPA and the government of Kenya in convening the Nairobi Summit. But I think, as we've said repeatedly, convening the summit was the easy part, even though it was tough. The hard part is actually making sure that the more than 1,200 commitments from governments, private sector, civil society, community partners, and all of those others that showed up in Nairobi is turned into concrete action. So I really want to thank IPPF for the report and the very thorough analysis of the Nairobi Summit commitments. Then IPPF has long been a trusted and close partner of Denmark, and we count actually on IPPF and other civil society organizations and people like you, Ulukbek, to do your part, especially at the national level, to hold governments and other actors accountable for the commitments they made at the summit. We really need you to keep us on our toes. Now, I think looking at the analysis of the commitments across different regions, as was mentioned earlier, it reveals that domestic funding commitments constituted a relatively low share of the total number of commitments. And I think that the continuous lack of political prioritization of investments in gender equality and women's rights, including their sexual and reproductive and health rights, is disappointing and frankly speaking, quite hard to understand. Now, for Denmark, the case for investing in gender equality and women's rights is undebatable. And actually, I think the saying that teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime, but teach a woman to fish and everyone eats for a lifetime, quite eloquently describes the benefits of investing in gender equality and women's rights. Putting women and girls at the center of economies will fundamentally drive better and more sustainable development outcomes for all. Now, you asked me about Denmark, so I'll get to that. Denmark is in many ways a point in case of the many benefits of investing in gender equality and women's rights. To mention just a few, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, greater credibility in institutions, and heightened democratic outcomes. I suppose there are those that will argue that we've seen this most lately with Denmark's handling of the COVID-19 challenge, an effort and a response led by a female prime minister. But I'll actually also go back to talk a little bit about what my prime minister, in those days a male, said in 2016 at the opening of the Women Deliver conference in Copenhagen. And what he said was something like, there are those that think that Denmark have progressed on gender equality because we are prosperous. But the reality is that it is the other way around. We are prosperous because we have progressed on gender equality. So for us, it's not just a question of doing what is right. It also happens to be smart. Now, you asked what lessons I have to share from Denmark's experience in terms of achieving progress towards gender equality and women empowerment. Now, what is clear is that achieving lasting progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment requires real political will and long-term investment. It won't just materialize on itself. Now, I think investing in gender equality, that's like investing in the human infrastructure of your society, of your economy, and of your nation. It's about releasing the potential. And when women are allowed to spread their wings, then families, communities, and nations, they will fly. So governments must take responsibility for creating, adjusting, and altering the societal structures that are conducive for achieving gender equality. Now, I'll give you an example from Denmark. We have invested in welfare institutions such as nurseries, kindergartens, and care for the elderly. And by doing so, successfully created structures that allowed both men and women to enter the labor market, growing our economy, growing our prosperity. Now, going back to the analysis of the commitments made at the Nairobi Summit, it's also clear that most domestic funding commitments were focused on sexual and gender-based violence and gender equality. And there were very few commitments made on sensitive policy issues such as abortion and comprehensive sexuality education. And to me, this, I must admit, continues to be mind-boggling, because what can be more fundamental than a woman's right to decide over her own body? Let's be honest, if this was about men, we wouldn't even be discussing it. Now, we are well aware that it is harder to mobilize funds for some of the most sensitive aspects of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And Denmark is therefore a strong financial supporter of many initiatives, also beyond UNFPA, initiatives like Amplify Change, an organization that provides grants to hundreds of civil society organizations that advocate for improved policy and action on the most neglected sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. So what we can do from Denmark's side is we can showcase what we have learned, our good experiences, but also our bad experience, and be honest about that we continue to have challenges also, but that we are determined to address those, because it is in the interest of women and girls, because it's the right of women and girls, but also because it is in the interest of society. The reality is we will not get to the Sustainable Development Goals unless we deliver on SDG number 5. So I want to thank IPPF for our strong partnership and look forward to continuing working closely together to make sure that the commitments made at Nairobi actually lead to real changes in the real lives of real women and girls. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Mr. Ambassador,
yes,
it was so pleasure to listen your experience on this. So now I would like to give the floor to the Taha to ask his question now. Thank you.
Thanks for you, Ambassador Martin and Olok. I'm Taha Samai from Yemen, board member at Yemeni Association for Reproductive Health, member of Regional Youth Network Arab World, It's my pleasure to address my question to Dr. Alvaro Barmijo, IPPF Director General. The report shows that 77 commitments on comprehensive sexuality education have been made by governments at the Nairobi Summit. The highest number are from Europe and Central Asia, with 24 commitments. Lowest number are from South Asia countries with 3 commitments. In my region, the Arab world, only 4.2 of Dr. Alfaro, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In my region, the Arab world, only 4.2% of the total number of commitments are on comprehensive sexuality education. And we have country champions like Tunisia and Morocco. Across the globe, there are still challenges that to support comprehensive sexuality education. I know that IPPF made a commitment to achieve comprehensive sexuality education in the Nairobi Summit. So I would like to know, in your opinion, what are the main obstacles to achieve comprehensive sexuality education and how to overcome them for every young women and girls to make decisions about their own bodies and lives?
Thank you, Tasha. Thanks for that question, and thank you also to Ambassador Martin for his words, to Anna, and to all the young trustees, my bosses, who are here. I'll be very careful to stick to the time to make sure that I don't pay a large price with my trustees sort of listening afterwards. As you said, Tasha, the report is worrying, but in a way not a surprise. Comprehensive sexuality education is, as Ambassador Martin just said, one of those sensitive areas that governments tend to shy away from. So what are the main barriers to providing comprehensive sexuality education around the world? Well, I would say first and foremost, it's the ideological barriers that make it difficult for some to accept that sexuality is a natural part of human existence and that young people have the right to make informed decisions about it. Macho politics, societal panic, and parental anxiety about sexual behavior of young people act as the biggest barrier. First, there's an assertion that individuals engage in sexuality and sexual activity only after marriage, and a belief that sex education will lead to more and earlier sex. Second, the concept of marriage in many places is limited to heteronormative unions. So in many countries, this leaves behind the vast majority of young unmarried individuals and those that fall outside heterosexual binary genders. So that's the first barrier. The second barrier is very broad. It's really lack of access to quality formal education around the world. That tends to exclude millions of young people from schools and makes it imperative that comprehensive sexuality education reaches out of school youth through the use of digital technologies. And finally, there's a lack of teacher training, of teaching materials, a lack of time in the timetable, and insufficient monitoring and evaluation that prevent the rollout of comprehensive sexuality education, even where all the previous barriers have been overcome. So as a consequence, it's not surprising that in many places, young people can't access CSE or can only access very poor quality CSEs, and that we're seeing regressive forces pushing back further and governments shying away. But we actually know that guaranteeing young people's access to CSE is a smart investment. Why? Because it equips them with the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that will empower them to realize their health, their well-being, and their dignity. It will help them develop respectful social and sexual relationships and ensure the protection of their rights throughout their lives. So how to overcome these barriers, and what are IPPF and others working on? Firstly, to put young people like you at the center of this fight. You're the ones that know what you need and where you need to meet to access information. So you all should be driving any policy on CSE. Second, we need to increase the sense of urgency to advocate for CSE. Time is of the essence for two reasons. One, because there is a very, very large youth population becoming sexually active in the next few years. And because if we truly want to achieve ICPD and the Agenda 2030 commitments, investment in CSE has to be one of the answers to reach the right to health, education, gender equality, and to tackle GBV. So we would have liked to see many more commitments, but we need to at least make sure that those have committed to expanding CSE deliver on that. Thirdly, we know that if we're going to succeed, we need to open the scope and establish wider partnerships that go beyond health. In a way, if one thing COVID-19 has taught us is that we cannot tackle health issues with health solutions only. We need to open up to other sectors. And lastly, we need to recognize that education is a process that goes beyond schools. And while we definitely should keep trying to integrate CSE in national curricula, we should keep focus on digital technologies and the opportunities they provide for young people to access information out of school. This is why IPPF, as you've mentioned, together with Rutgers, committed in Nairobi to provide 12 million young people in 30 countries. And that had a specific focus on Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America with comprehensive sexuality education. We also committed to influencing and supporting 42 governments to establish new or revised policy initiatives or legislative changes to include CSE in the curricula of formal education programs or programs for out-of-school adolescents. And last but not least, we committed to establishing at least 3 centers of excellence in priority regions to work in youth-centered programming and CSE. Progress on these commitments is on its way, and I can proudly say that since schools and non-formal education establishments were closed during COVID-19, many IPPF member associations, actually 51 out of the 124 who we've been able to survey, responded by delivering CSE through digital and social media platforms. We as IPPF are fully committed to overcoming these barriers and keeping the fight for young people to drive their destinies. Thank you.
Thanks for your comprehensive answer, Dr. Alvaro. Now I would pass the floor to Martin, the Youth Action Movement from Sierra Leone, to address her question about SGBV. Thanks for you.
Hello, Marianne. You're not audible. Can you try again, please? Hello, Marianne. So sorry to interrupt. You're not audible.
And it's going to be directed to Blacala, who is representing the government of Mexico. Looking at the reports, I was so excited for the fact that a lot of nations made their commitment on sexual and gender-based violence, which is very encouraging. But my question now is this. I want to know what strategy has been put in place to monitor sexual and gender-based violence in country level, especially when most countries do not have a safe space for sexual and gender-based violence survivors.
So thank you for your question, Marianne. Greetings from Mexico to all, especially to all youth participants today, and a great thank you on behalf of the government of Mexico to IPPF for the opportunity to join you from this side of the world. Marianne, your question is key. I will speak on the situation in Mexico. And according to one of our most recent national surveys, 2 out of 3 women that are 15 years or older have reported having had suffered at least one sexual or gender-based violence episode during with data from this same survey. We also know that every year more than 500,000 women in our country are sexually raped, which is appalling. However, only a very small fraction of these cases, less than 7,000 of them, are registered within our health system. So to us, this means that we have missed the opportunity to provide access to key interventions such as emergency contraception for unwanted pregnancies, prophylaxis for sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV, or psychological care and social protection in cases of extreme violence. Thus, monitoring the dimension of sexual and gender-based violence is critical so that the Mexican government is able not only to provide sufficient health services, but also legal and social protection interventions in order to prevent and ultimately eradicate violence against women and girls. We are fully aware that we need to accelerate our efforts for the full and effective implementation and funding of the ICPD Program of Action and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. At ICPD 25, we committed to eliminate child marriage and pregnancy, for example. And in Mexico, every year we register more than 11,000 cases where girls 10 to 14 years of age become pregnant. And these pregnancies are surely the result of coercion and violence. And at the core of our commitment is to ensure universal availability of quality sexual and reproductive health services, of course, including access to safe abortion, which is nationally legal under the rape clause. So monitoring not only the dimension of girl pregnancy, but also identifying to detail who these girls are that have been subject to the greatest disparities. And for example, in Mexico, this represents that they might come from indigenous communities where we know there is increased social vulnerability and risk of violence. Is critical so that we arrive at public policies that are fully centered on these girls' needs, but that will also allow to track progress at the meeting of our commitments. So I note in your question, Marianne, that you are also interested in safe spaces for survivors of extreme sexual and gender-based violence. And as you clearly identify, refuge for women and girls is not necessarily accessible to all. In Mexico, for example, we know that shelters are today insufficient and will continue to be so unless we also fully realize that violence is a multi-dimensional problem that must be dealt with preventive strategies to modify society norms. And that is why, for instance, the Mexican government has committed to work with a gender equality perspective in order to modify at all levels attitudes and behaviors, including breaking stereotypes and gender roles, and to improve norms and policies to eliminate discrimination and violence against all girls and women. So thank you for your questions, Marian. It is certainly a pleasure to be able to connect from the other side of the world, and we greatly appreciate this space that has been provided by IPPF.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Dr. Carla, for such important insights. We will move forward, and I would like to thank
commitment, and we are sure that
okay, some technical glitches on our end, but yeah, I was just saying that I would like to thank all the panelists for raising and responding to such key questions. I really enjoyed listening to all the insights and did not enjoy interrupting at all, but well. And many thanks to everybody who has been a part of this dialogue. I hope that the audience feels inspired to act committed together now. I now have the honor to ask Dr. Natalia Khanum to give some closing remarks to all of us. Dr. Natalia Khanum is the Executive Director of UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, co-convener of the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25. She has more than 30 years of strategic leadership experience in the field of preventive medicine, public and reproductive health, social justice, and philanthropy. Over to you, Dr. Natalia Khanum.
Thank you so much. Greetings to everyone. Very excited to be with you today. Thank you, Pooja, Estelle, Anathes, Poetry, and all of the panelists. Really interesting discussion, acting committed together. And this roadmap to achieve ICPD has benefited from the views and the voices of youth leaders. Those views and voices have resounded here today, and we certainly heard you throughout last year, marching on the road to Nairobi ICPD 25, and now thereafter. For UNFPA, our commitment is to put young people first. Our guidance is towards action to see that we fulfill the Nairobi commitments and all the antecedents. This is the decade of action on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we want to move forward, regardless of the COVID pandemic. That is a challenge that only shows us how even more important sexual and reproductive health and rights is, the immediacy of what we have to do together. And it's teamwork that makes the dream work. Our UNFPA partnerships with young people, whether it's through AfriYan or YPeer, the Youth Action Network, and many, many others, that's vital. It's vital, and as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, the world needs a ceasefire. And for prosperity, we also need peace in the home. What that implies is zero tolerance for the type of gender-based violence that we just heard about from the panelists. Where is this new leadership and the torch bearing to reshape the ICPD agenda for what we need now for action going forward going to come from? Who is going to step up and hold power accountable for promises that were made in Cairo, in Nairobi, and in Beijing? Well, it is young people who fully understand the relevance of sexual and reproductive health and rights. My body, my life, our world. Very relevant to completing a good education, very relevant to compete for and to create new jobs in this particular upcoming labor market, and as we heard from Alvaro, for happy, healthy sexuality. In Nairobi, UNFPA, Restless Development, and so many other partners launched the Global Consensus Statement on Youth-Led Accountability. We're moving ahead to make those promises made into promises kept. Keep challenging, keep inspiring each other, and definitely keep leading. We must all listen more and use the power that we have for action. This begins now. And you can count upon my skillful and dedicated UNFPA colleagues who are working on the ground all over the world to keep making the investment case for zero unmet need for contraception, for zero deaths during pregnancy and childbirth, and certainly for zero gender-based violence, and that includes harmful practices. The evidence clearly shows the huge benefit of investing in sexual and reproductive health and rights to individuals, to societies, and to the world. And partnership is central to this. You've heard great examples today of how UNFPA and IPPF are working together, taking these Nairobi commitments off the page to build on the forward momentum from the Nairobi Summit. And I would like to thank Alvaro and the good people of IPPF for that. In total, 173 countries participated in Nairobi ICPD 25. And now many are incorporating their self-declared Nairobi commitments into the national development plans, which is where it counts. And we are helping to pilot assessment studies. We're identifying gaps and paving the way for legislative action to uphold those Nairobi commitments. And on the road to SDG 3 and SDG 5, right? Health and gender equality. ICPD originally was followed by Beijing. So now we celebrate Beijing 25, and UNFPA is proud to lead the Generation Equality Coalition on bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I'm inviting you to join me tomorrow to continue to take charge of generation equality, because with generation equality leading, that is when child marriages end. That is when female genital mutilation ends and son preference ends. So against my will ends. And I invite you to join me and other youth leaders tomorrow for my next What's Next global conversation to hear all about empowering adolescent girls in the time of COVID-19. The details are at unfpa.org. We have estimated that COVID-19, sadly, may lead to millions of lives upended by gender-based violence and unintended pregnancies. And we can't let that happen. Sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, for everyone, for women and girls, and for people of all sexual diversities. Periods and pregnancies don't stop because of a pandemic. It's up to each of us to stand up for everyone's human rights and to end racism now. I close with hopeful words from another poet, Vicky the poet from Sierra Leone, who was 11 years old when she addressed the Commission on the Status of Women last year. After it, she wrote, #CSW resurrected my muse that was slain by the shadows of my very own fear. I am bold like gold. I will eternally glow. So I say to you, be bold, keep your glow, and I expect you to help write that next chapter of history when we build back better for women, for girls, for young people everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karam, for your inspiring words and for your leadership in organizing the Nairobi Summit. It has always been inspiring to hear you. And even though we couldn't see you on camera, we can hear the passion and determination in your voice. We are committed to work with your country offices all over the world to fulfill the ICPD promises and make the promises a reality for all. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And for the closure, I would now request, so before we move towards closure, I would like to thank all the panelists, youth leaders, and participants in the audience for sharing key insights with us. To close this dialogue here, which is actually just the beginning of so much more action on ground, I would request everyone to put one word in the chat box as to how you're going to be working on fulfilling ICPD promise and act committed together now. My word is accountability. So action, implementation, advocacy, solidarity, participation, data, perseverance. Such important words, and I'm sure everyone is really working on financing. Definitely, like Taha said, like Uluk said, like without financing, a lot of promises seem to be hollow. So definitely, yes, youth, keeping young people at the center, love, compassion, focus, definitely, definitely. Thank you all for participating. And just like I mentioned right at the beginning of the event, that Fuselight will be recording, doing a visual representation of the entire event. So here is what we can see on the screen. It's a visual representation of everything that we've covered, from what happened in ICPD, what were the kinds of commitments made, the different important thematic areas like CSE, ASRHR, abortion, and how many governments participated, and definitely the entire theme of this event, which is acting committed together. So thank you everyone for being here with us. Thank you, Dr. Natalia Khanum again. And we will be sending you all of this detail. It will be put up on website, so everyone can check it out there. For those who have registered, emails will be sent. And yeah, keep doing the awesome work you're all doing. Thank you so much.